It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Wanted to look back this week because I think what happened on Sunday was a big deal. I think it was a big freaking deal. The idea of expanding Social Security for the first time in a couple of decades. This idea that we're going to help working people. And it has been at the heart of what Joe Biden did during his presidency. But this Social Security Fairness Act is going to make people's lives better. Some 3 million people across this country are going to make them whole, going to right a wrong from the past, going to go and undo something of the Reagan era. It's interesting to me to see the parallels between 1979 and 1980 and today. It's interesting to see we're in another one of those moments where, again, working people are going to be the target. The difference being, I think Joe Biden actually tried to do his best to undo the neoliberalism that began really, Ford era, Carter era, and accelerated massively during the Reagan era. I look at this as a moment where someone cared about workers for a moment. I think we're going to live through 4 years where there's going to be a lot of rhetoric about who cares about working people and who doesn't. I think we're going to hear a lot of bluster. I think there's going to be a lot of bloviation, especially from the guy who owns Truth Social and the guy who owns Twitter or X. We're going to hear a lot of, can I say the word? No, BS. We're going to hear a lot of bull. They're going to fill our eyes and our ears with a bunch of, to steal a Biden word, malarkey. The question is, are we going to buy it? The responses that I've got on this Social Security Fairness Act from people have been, I guess, depending on how you voted for. If you voted for Biden, you think this is a good thing. If you voted for Trump, this is the worst thing ever. And it's something that, again, red hat, blue hat, instead of saying, no, this is a worker issue, because guess what? Of those 3 million people who are going to benefit from them, a lot of cops and firefighters, a lot of those people voted for red hats. So for me, this isn't a right-left issue. This is an up-down issue. This is working people finally getting something. But even in this step forward, even in this expansion of Social Security, even in this help for working people, the wealthy got away again. And by not having a pay for, which generally Republicans lose their mind over, by not having this pay for, taxing billionaires, you're now making it so that Social Security is a little less well-funded, a little more vulnerable, a little closer to that deadline down the road where benefit cuts are going to happen, somewhere between 17 and 21%. I've seen it as high as 25%. If we do nothing, crisis will happen. And again, I'm a firm believer, and I've finally come to the reality that America only reacts to crisis. That we as working people, we as a country, we cannot come together and put our red hats and our blue hats aside until there's a crisis. And a crisis is brewing. Social Security will have a cut down the road. That's going to happen if we do nothing. That's going to happen. And the longer we wait to do nothing, the harder the solution is going to be. But I believe we have to wait. The simple answer, the logical, the reasonable, the sane answer is Elon Musk paying 1 minute for the year of Social Security tax is ludicrous. 1 minute. while working people are showing up to work every day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, and paying into a fund that they are being told repeatedly isn't going to be there for them. This is all by design. This is not an accident. This is not just, oh, well, no. This was well gamed out. This was well thought out. This was planned and executed. What has to happen, though, and, in talking with Alex Lawson recently over at Social Security Works, he seems to believe that this coalition that came together to fight for this expansion will continue this fight into going after taxing the wealthy, scrapping the cap, expanding the amount of the number of income sources that are taxed. It's ridiculous that if you gamble on Wall Street, you're exempt. It's ridiculous that if you're making $4 billion a year, your liability is $176,000, whereas somebody who makes $176,000 pays on 100% of their income. It's ridiculous. It's a flawed system. Because understand, and I can't emphasize this enough because I don't think we hear it enough. Social Security is not an investment plan. It's not a retirement plan. It's not you going down to, XYZ investment company and going, make me money. No. Social Security was conceived, derived, and enacted as an anti-poverty program. It was to make sure that when we get to old age, that we have something to live on. It is one of the most socialist, progressive programs we have. And understand, red hat, blue hat, green hat, no hat, everybody universally in the working class sees its value. And if you were to talk about taking my grandmother's Social Security check or Medicare from her, she would have beat you with her cane and then her walker. And that's how most working people are. Because understand the progressivity of Social Security. If you spent your entire life working for poverty wages, you're going to get a little bit more than you paid in to make sure that you don't live in poverty. And if you made a whole lot of money, you're probably not going to get the same kind of increase because you don't need it. But ultimately, we've got the wealthy people who don't like that. We've got the Doge boys of the world and the Vivics and the Trumps who are like, no, mine, me. And we're going to see that come out in policy. We're going to see over the next 4 years, especially over the next several weeks, the big, beautiful bill that is supposed to cut taxes and throw people out of the country and do all kinds of things that the wet dream fantasy crowd on the right told us they were going to do. And we're going to walk into this with our eyes open because we did this as a nation. Maybe not you, maybe not me, but as a nation, we've done this. And we're going to have to open our eyes and see what's coming. And what's coming is, again, working people taking it on the chin. So when I see the Biden era, I see this as the kind of the cherry on the top of the sundae, if you will. This is a good thing. This is going to help working people. It's going to add to the legacy of Joe Biden as a champion, as someone who found his way towards ending some bit of neoliberalism, as pursuing policy to actually focus on returning to a prosperous working class where people like you and me, we've got a shot. And in our retirement, we're not going to get singled out and divided and pitted against each other because we have a pension or we don't. This is another one of those moments where, I go back to if someone has a pension and you don't, instead of saying, why do they have one and I don't, ask, how do I get one? Because for me, the answer is we make all people's lives better. We provide that safety net under folks who maybe aren't as lucky, weren't born into a billionaire family, weren't handed invisible capital. Oh, I don't know, like an emerald mine in South Africa. Kind of makes me wonder. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Are you excited about the next 4 years, or like me, are you concerned that you're the target? Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Right back.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So yesterday on the program, we talked about what a big deal the Social Security Fairness Act was that was signed this week on January 5th. And again, this is what the Biden administration has promised they're going to do. They're going to help working people. And this has been decades in the making of undoing a wrong that was done during the Reagan years. So, kind of a big deal. And maybe a little late in the administration, but I'm glad to see it got done. But here to share some thoughts on what the event was like and how important, how big a deal this is. I've asked CWA President Claude Cummings Jr. to come share some thoughts on the Social Security Fairness Act. Claude, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you so much, Rick, for having me on, and hello to your listening audience. And man, the president said this the other day while I was at the White House. He said, this is a real big, and then he called himself because, he he kind of cursed the last time he went there. But he said, this is really a big deal. And it really is, Rick, for public sector workers. This repeals a pair of provisions that had limited benefits for recipients on their pensions and other pensions and Social Security for years. And he's the first president in 20 years to expand benefits. And what he's done with this Social Security Fairness Act is he's eliminated two provisions, that made it difficult for public sector employees to get their full Social Security. The windfall elimination provision trimmed benefits for public employees who receive pensions not covered by Social Security, payroll taxes. The government pension offset, the other one, cut Social Security, spousal or widow benefits for those who also receive public pensions not covered by Social Security. And this is going to affect about 3 million workers in this country. Think about this. Yeah. 3 million workers will now be able to get fair Social Security benefits. And also, there's going to be some back payments. I think they're going to go back into 2024 and make lump sum payments to those who have been harmed by the provisions of this.
By this act.
Prior to him signing this into law.
No, and this is great. But what do you say to the people who, this has been, this was a Reagan era policy. This is something they did back during the Reagan years to stick it to workers. There's all of that. There's all of those people who have been harmed. So I think pointing out the fact that you go from Reagan forward
because of double dipping. I mean, they deserve what they work for, right? Simple as that.
No, and this is where I go back to the point is that, you go Reagan era forward, the Republican Party has not been the friend of working people. And I know they're trying to pivot, and I know there was some bipartisan support on this, but ultimately this wrong was done by Republicans, and Joe Biden is the guy who righted it.
He has fixed it. Just like he's fixed a number of things, Rick. First president that has marched on a picket line. All of the offshoring of manufacturing jobs that are now coming back in to this country. And a couple of them CWA has agreements with. Akash, a manufacturing company. Those are going to be good jobs, good benefits, and CWA is going to be representing those members. We're sitting down and talking with Micron, another semiconductor company that we're talking about a labor peace agreement with that will make sure that these are good union paying jobs with good health care benefits, good safety provisions on the job. I thank God for Joe Biden and the administration and what he has done to help working people in this country. And in my opinion, it's just a shame that that now, we all have to be somewhat cautious about what might be taking place in the next administration. I will tell you, I was somewhat surprised at the pick that the president has chosen for the labor, the Secretary of Labor, Laura Chavez de Remeter, I think is her name. She's from Oregon, a former Congress member. She has a history of being pro-labor. Hopefully he will allow her to do her job, right? But she signed on to the PRO Act early. She has supported other labor initiatives. And so hopefully he will allow her to do her job. And so we'll have to sit back and see what happens.
Ultimately, I've been putting a ticker on how long she's going to be around because, clearly, this was, in my view, this was pay back to Sean O'Brien, the Teamsters president, for his support during the election. I do believe that, and we'll see how long she remains. Ultimately, we're going to see who he puts into those NLRB spots. Now, you said that you're working with companies that are coming back because of the investments that Biden made through the CHIPS Act and the American Recovery Act and all of that. Are we concerned that Republicans now having control of all three branches of government are going to undo some of those provisions in those bills, claw back some of those resources, and ultimately stop this progress?
Well, initially, the Speaker of the House made those comments. He said, we're going to take a look at these manufacturing companies that are coming back over. We're going to take a look at whether or not we need, some of the items they've agreed to. But then he was told to shut up. And I don't know if it's Trump who told him to back off of it or other Congress members, but he got off of it. So we really have not heard anything moving forward. Hopefully they won't. Listen, there's no doubt in my mind that workers that are not in labor unions are the ones who supported this president. I wish there had been better messaging from the Democratic Party because let's face it, when Trump was first elected, he inherited the Obama economy, right? I mean, he did. That's what happened. President Biden inherited his economy, which was bad, and he is now trying to turn around. It was bad at the end of his term, I should say.
No, look, Claude, that's not new. You stop and you think about, Clinton inherited the H.W. Bush recession, handed W. Bush a good economy. Bush collapsed it, handed Obama a failing free fall economy that Obama and the Democrats cleaned back up, and you got Trump who came back in and boogered it up again. So I'm expecting, if history tells us what the future is going to be, I'm expecting the Biden economy, which is moving in the right direction.
That's exactly right. It's going to be better, and he's inherited that. What's taking place, and but there should have been better messaging from the Democratic Party to talk about that, and that's one of the most disappointing things I think in this whole election cycle. That with all of the money that was raised by Democrats, a historic amount of money, there was no messaging for some of the negative ads that were being sent out by the Republican campaign. None, absolutely. Nothing that addressed the trans issue that actually started under the Biden campaign. Nothing to address the economy issue. I mean, nothing to talk about the manufacturing jobs that are being brought back into this country. And to be quite honest with you, there are a lot of discussions taking place within labor as well as candidates who are running to be chair of the DNC on how we can turn this thing around to make sure everybody understands clearly that Democrats are the party of working people in this country.
And look, it comes back to the policies, and this Social Security Fairness Act is a step in the right direction.
Right.
But also, for me, and hopefully this. I had a conversation with Alex Lawson from Social Security Works yesterday, and he said, look, he agreed. This is going to put a strain on Social Security. but it's also mobilizing people, the folks who got this done, to say, look, we want to protect Social Security. The other part of this should have been paying for these benefits and the expansion here, and having people like Elon Musk pay Social Security taxes longer than a minute into the new year, and that we need to scrap the cap and do some smart things to shore up the fund. That, I hope, is the next fight.
Yeah, I hope so. Because let's face it, there will be a strain on Social Security with some of the money that's going to be paid out now, as well as some of the lump sums that will be that will be given to those who have been hurt by the provision of the windfall elimination provision, as well as the GPO, the General Pension Offset. So hopefully Congress will address that. This was, bipartisan moving forward, and hope they'll do what needs to be done to secure the plan to make sure there's money available for those who retire in the future.
Yeah, you said this is bipartisan, and there was a small number of Republicans who came on board. Do you see an actual shift? Because Republicans have made overtures towards working people. There's a lot of rhetoric. This is a small step towards actually having some action. Do you see the Republican Party moving towards being the party of working people and working with Democrats to actually get something, like the PRO Act, something that's going to help organizing, something that's going to help get better wages, hours, conditions, better health care options? Do you see any of that, or is it just rhetoric at this point in your view?
I'll be quite honest with you. We'll just have to wait and see. I do not believe that. Do I believe that we'll get from the Republican administration what we've gotten out of President Biden? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I believe that we need to take a wait and see type attitude, but we also need to make sure that we're not afraid. I've heard some leaders that are just absolutely terrified of what may be taking place, the attacks that may come. Listen, I just told the CWA staff and the executive board a couple of weeks ago that I'm not going to do anything to make CWA a target of the administration. But if CWA comes under fire, workers in this country in general come under fire, just like I've spoke out on the Maximus campaign and how those workers were being treated over there by the Biden administration, just like I said the Biden administration, but I meant as far as the federal pay for those workers is concerned. I will speak out boldly. I will not be afraid to take on the administration if CWA comes under attack or if workers in general come under attack. As long as we're unified as a labor movement and we speak out on issues that are detrimental to workers in this country, I think that we'll be fine.
Yeah, because this is where, for me, when the bad things start happening, and I believe, the Trump administration is going to do a lot of bad things that are going to harm workers. This idea of people coming together, rediscovering solidarity, and standing shoulder to shoulder with people I may not entirely agree with, but fighting for better wages, hours, conditions, opportunities for our kids. I think that can unite us. And I've been saying for a long time, you want to reunite America, we need to reunionize America.
That's exactly right. Listen, workers voted for him based on his rhetoric during the election. I'm going to make things better. Things are going to be better. I mean, you heard that in every speech that he made. And there are many in this country that believed him. And if I had an opportunity to talk with him, I would say to him, you want to make things better for workers in this country that voted for you? The best way to do that is allow them to organize. The best way to do that is to allow the PRO Act. Convince Republicans, right, to vote for the PRO Act, to give those workers an opportunity to have a say in the workplace and to organize so they can have better wages and better benefits. Whether he throws me out of the room if I were to say that to him or not, who knows? But that's what I would tell him because they voted for him, right? I mean, union members voted like they were supposed to in this country for the vice president, right? And for an administration that has stood up for workers. Supported workers, signed this bill and other legislation to help workers. And so I would say to him, if you really want to make things better for workers in this country, then pass the PRO Act, allow workers to have a voice on the job, allow them to be able to organize without any pushback from corporations.
Yeah, last question I got for you. Last question I've got for you, Claude, because obviously the signing of this is kind of the last big thing I think the Biden administration is going to get done. What kind of an event, what kind of a moment? I've had people tell me it was somber. I've had people tell me it was a celebration of what they believe is going to be his legacy. Do you have any sense of the historical moment that it was?
On the signing of this bill?
Yeah.
I heard a break, so I wasn't sure of the question.
Yeah, and when you attended the signing of the Social Security Act, right?
Right.
The Fairness Act. What was the mood like in the room?
It was really a celebration. One of the things that happened that and I've been to a number of events at the White House, is the president speaks, and then of course he leaves. The Secret Service says everybody has to go, this kind of thing, and they actually tried to shut it down to stop labor leaders and others who want to take a picture with the president. They made the announcement, we need everybody to leave now. The president needs to go. The president turned around and he said, I'm not going anywhere. And he stood there and took pictures and talked with labor leaders for over an hour. And as a matter of fact, I had an opportunity to talk with him and thank him for everything that he had done to support our initiatives. And he said, listen, Claude, I want you to thank your CWA members, your executive board, and your members. He said, you all have been with me from the very start of my career. And I want to thank you for everything that all of you have, all that CWA has done. And I was pretty proud to hear that come directly, out of his mouth to me.
Yeah, no, I've heard it was a wonderful event.
Wonderful event.
Claude Cummings Jr., I appreciate you taking some time for us. I look forward to having you back as well. What comes, comes, and I want to hear your thoughts. But Claude, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so very much, Rick, for having me.
Claude Cummings Jr., president of CWA, the Communication Workers of America. Want to hear your thoughts. Is this the big freaking deal? I think it kind of is. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Right back.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So I got to tell you, kind of a somber mood as I watched the videos of former President Jimmy Carter's casket being escorted from the U.S. Navy Memorial up to Capitol Hill. And you couldn't help but think of what a great person Jimmy Carter was. The family man that him and Rosalind were, the example of decency, the example of what I think good Christians are and should be. Good, salt of the earth, decent people. Now, as I was watching the procession, as I was remembering, as a child watching him as president, as I was remembering as an activist, some of the policies, good and bad, I couldn't help but, one, feel sad. The country lost a decent human being. But being honest, that we're in a moment that the country was shaped by his policies and in not a great direction. While I give him credit for the Camp David Accords, facilitating some peace negotiations between Egypt and Israel, that the highlight of his time. Energy policy that started talking about, hey, maybe we need to get off the dirty stuff. Maybe we need to be less vulnerable to the world because that was out of circumstance. Maybe we do need to produce more. Maybe we need to conserve more. Maybe we need alternatives. First guy to put solar panels on the White House, only to have Reagan come in and rip them off. One of those things I remember as a kid. His environmental initiatives were something that I, as a child, were all in favor of. Expanding national parks, cleaning up the mess that corporate America did across this country. He established a Superfund program to clean up hazardous waste sites. Because as a kid growing up in a housing project, we were near all of the worst places because they don't generally put housing projects in good areas. It's normally not the best land in the neighborhood. But a decent man. I mean, promoted human rights, made that a central theme of our policy. Attempted to deal with healthcare, had some healthcare initiatives that, wanted to expand Medicaid to help improve public health. Tried a lot of stuff. Tried to invest in low and moderate income communities. Tried to help. And I would argue tried in a Christian value way. A couple years ago, I had the opportunity to go to his presidential library in Atlanta. And if you have a chance, I'm a big fan of presidential libraries because what it does is it shows how they saw their term. And it shows how they saw the years that they spent there and what they accomplished. And I remember, walking through here, through it going, he was handed a giant bag of, what? A steaming pile, if you will, because the country was in chaos. We were in the midst of stagflation. The OPEC thing was going on. Gas prices were high. Food prices were high. Interest rates were crazy. You listen to people today talk about our current inflation, you don't know anything unless you lived through the 70s. When we had massive inflation. I was talking to a relative who said, when they bought their first home, it was almost 13% interest on a mortgage, but it didn't faze them. It didn't affect them because they were making more money. They had a union job. The union job had a cost of living adjustment in their contract. So their wages kept up. It's different than it is today. But I was thinking about Carter, and I was thinking about his focus on diplomacy and human rights and domestic policy, even though he was viewed as a very weak president. He didn't want to go in and bomb Iran. He didn't want to start another war. And the hostage situation, the hostage crisis was one of those things that 444 days, you had 52 Americans, diplomats and citizens being held by these Iranians. And I remember at the time, the push towards war. We had to go in there and bomb. And I remember kids on my playground, talking about going after and killing these Iranians. And I remember just thinking this fevered pitch could have gotten us into a war. And Carter, through diplomacy and attempted diplomacy, did what he thought was best. Now, was it a massive embarrassment? Sure. Was it a massive public frustration? Yeah. But now I go back and you learn a little bit about it and you go, I don't know, seemed kind of staged. Because when Reagan's hand touched the Bible, those people were released. And then we hear stories of, malfeasance, of promises from the Reagan camp. Kind of makes you wonder. Was this another example of political gamesmanship where the country be damned? Look, I understand the economic frustration of the era. Lived through part of it. I understand the frustration of the oil crisis. Lived through part of it. The failure of domestic policies. I lived through some of it. But ultimately was a good and decent man. Now, my frustration, I'd argue, kind of our first real neoliberal president. He was a very conservative Democrat. The kind of Democrat that I'm not thrilled with. In the same mold of Bill Clinton, in the same mold of Barack Obama, and I know I'm going to get a lot of angry hate mail, but this idea of corporate bending at the knee to corporate interest, making sure that they're well heeled. As a labor guy, my frustration with Carter is large. Carter signed trucking and airline deregulation. You could say, Rick, the oil embargo had a lot to do with that. Inflation had a lot to do with that, and it did. Clearly, they thought it was going to bring down prices. They thought that, by opening this up, you would make transportation cheaper. And for a short period of time, that's happened. But instead of the benefits going to workers and consumers, it's just gone to investors and owners, which I would argue is predictable. And it's what we've learned from neoliberalism as a whole. And it's the reason that the right is right there with it. They're right on board. It's why Reagan was the great neoliberal president. This idea of tax cuts for the wealthy, this idea of deregulating business, this idea of the invisible hand and the free market taking care of things, that hasn't really worked well for average, everyday working people. Carter didn't live up to his promises of undoing Taft-Hartley, supporting workers' rights to organize, doing a whole bunch of things that would have helped. Was there rhetoric during the campaign? Yeah. And that was in his presidential library. Spent a lot of time looking at that stuff, but didn't put the muscle behind it because, one, he was a moderate Democrat, a Southern Democrat, of course, a peanut farmer, a small businessman, and thought of, and this is where I come back to where my point has been over this last week, thought of running government like a business. Short-term thinking, short-term investments, short-term policy. Instead of thinking, how do we expand for the future? How do we expand in large ways? I would argue was very, very, very business-like, worrying about the next quarter. Do I think Jimmy Carter was an incredible human being? Absolutely. I don't think he was a great president. And I think a lot had to do with the fact that it was the time, it was the era, it was the situation, certainly. But I would have done things differently. And trucking deregulation is one of those things that is near and dear to me, because that's the industry that I've watched firsthand diminish. There had been, a couple hundred unionized trucking companies, the top couple hundred. I've got a graph somewhere of the top 200. Just about all union carriers, almost all of them. Something like 85% of every less than truckload LTL truck on the road was a union company. And those drivers made excellent wages. They had excellent benefits, healthcare, retirement, all of that stuff. Good working conditions, safety was at the front. And all those are gone, with the exception of maybe one or two companies that have hung on. All of that's gone. And you can argue, well, it was Reagan, and it was Reagan who accelerated that, and it was. But by opening that door, by deregulating that industry without saying, hey, maybe we do need to put some guardrails, was a major mistake. And it's part of the Carter legacy. And it's part of why working people struggle with Democrats. You go through Carter, you go through Clinton, you go through Obama, and they've all bent the knee to corporate interests. They all promised to do something to help labor. Carter, ran on, we're going to undo Taft-Hartley. Bill Clinton ran on, we're going to stop strike replacement. Barack Obama ran on, we're going to bring the Employee Free Choice Act, or as he told me personally, we're going to get something better. And during all of that time, you had Joe Biden, who was part of a lot of that and on board with the consensus of the time. The consensus of the time was how we get out of these economic messes is we give rich people, big businesses, the smart people. We give them the power to unleash American entrepreneurial activity, and that is going to trickle down to the rest of us. Which brings us trickle down. We get trickle down economics, and what we get is, we get trickled on, all right, with all of the negative external costs, with all of the lower standard of living, with all of the lack of health care, with all of that, just not the wages, not the benefits, not the positive side. That's gone to our investor class. That's gone to our rich folks. And part of Carter's legacy is that. Now, the trucking industry, when you open that up and said, hey, any idiot who could buy a truck can start a trucking company, that was the end of it. You went from a solid middle class, solid working class, blue collar, middle class kind of job to, well, sweatshop on wheels. The only reason it didn't really happen in the airline industry is it's a lot more expensive to buy a plane, but they suffered too. They lost their pensions, they lost a lot of wages, but they've been able to hold on because they've stayed unionized. They've fought tooth and nail and are still struggling to catch up from what they had in the 70s. So when I hear working people say that they're angry, it has everything to do with that we've given corporations too much power. And while I think Jimmy Carter was a great person, and I think he was a great humanitarian, a great human being, I think he was wrong on the direction that he moved our country. And there's going to be a lot of rewriting of his legacy. There's going to be a lot of pointing fingers. There's going to be a lot of trying to diminish and tear down. Jimmy Carter's legacy was not his presidency. It was the incredible human being he was after. Because I'll always remember that guy out there with a hammer building some poor person a house. And that's what I choose to remember. I remember that guy. While the policies that he moved as president weren't great, don't think were helpful, and are part of why the Democratic Party has lost a large chunk of working people, there's a lesson in this. And the hope is right now the Democratic Party is looking inward. And maybe the reason I bring this up is maybe now is a good point, a good opportunity to look at someone who was an incredible person, recognize his flaws and correct. Learn from the lessons of the past and don't do it. And I think Joe Biden has done that. Throughout his career, yeah, he was on board with NAFTA and a lot of the bad trade deals. He was on board with a lot of the deregulation. But as president, he did the opposite of what Jimmy Carter did. And his legacy, I believe, will be that he had a good presidency, a great presidency. That's simple. Want to hear your thoughts. Do you have Carter memories? Do you remember the malaise speech? Do you remember that era? Do you remember his call to action on saving the environment and conserving? Want to hear your thoughts on that. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'll love to hear it. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1860. That was a day of tragedy as the Pemberton Mill collapsed in Lawrence, Massachusetts. The collapse of the 5-story textile mill was one of the worst workplace disasters in U.S. history. Most of the 800 workers in the mill were women and Irish immigrants. Some were teenagers. During that fateful afternoon, as they were working, they heard a strange rattling noise. Then, within seconds, the mill collapsed. Tons of machinery crashed through the collapsing floors, crushing workers. Many more were trapped. Rescuers attempted to free the trapped workers. But that night, as the rescue efforts continued, a fire broke out in the ruined plant. Many trapped workers were burned alive. Helplessly, the rescuers could only look on with horror. The exact number of dead is unknown, but estimates range between 88 and 145 workers killed that day, with another 150 suffering serious injuries. The large building was only 7 years old when it collapsed. Poor construction was determined to be the cause of the disaster. In an effort to maximize profits, the mill had more heavy equipment inside than the building could support. The New York Times reported, the building was never considered to be as staunch as it ought to have been. It was built about 7 years since and was then thought a sham. Indeed, before the machinery was put in, the walls spread to such a degree that some 22 tons of iron plates were put in to save it from falling by its own weight. After the disaster, the mill was rebuilt. Workers at the new mill claimed to see the ghosts of those who had died in the tragedy. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the reason I bring up Jimmy Carter outside of that, it really was a somber moment for me watching, and it really was, this feeling of loss, this feeling that the country did lose somebody who was an incredible person, and that is true, and that is heartfelt. But I got this sense that we're reliving history a little bit. Because the Iran hostage situation, it was really my first view as a kid. I was 12, 13 at the time, of what foreign policy, what danger lie around the corner, and that there was a very real possibility that, because we were just coming out of Vietnam, and as a kid, I remember, all of those people who were dumped into our community with broken minds, broken bodies, horrible drug and alcohol addiction problems, just dumped. And the carnage that I saw just in that. So being told that, hey, a couple years down the road, kid, you might be next, was something I keenly paid attention to. And I do remember that ramping up. And the Reagan rhetoric of, they'll be afraid of me. I'm the tough guy. And how on Inauguration Day, he put his hand on the Bible, and everyone, the narrative was everyone, they're scared to death. So they released him. We find out years later that that's a shaky story. So I'm looking at Trump here saying that if Hamas doesn't release the remaining hostages, but there are 101 hostages that are being held or believed to be being held by Hamas. But Trump has said that either they release them or, quote, all hell will break out. Now, we don't know what that means. He has said, in the past, he's not going to start wars. And, my red hat friends say, Donald Trump's a guy who doesn't start wars. This sounds like war rhetoric, or just sounds like, more for Israel to go even further. So for all my Democratic friends who said, I'm never voting for Joe Biden, it could get a lot worse. And understand, the red hats don't care. So this is an interesting moment, and I gotta tell you, there's part of me that then goes, much like the story that H.W. Bush, having been head of the CIA, lots of friends in lots of places, orchestrated that release. I gotta wonder, given the fact that there's some right-wing tendencies going on here with the leader of Israel and Trump, and some backstory that it kind of makes me suspicious. And I'll tell you, on January 20th, if Trump puts his hand on the Bible and these 101 hostages, miraculously appear in the streets wearing, tuxedos and eating caviar, I got a question. I'm going to question. Because what we're seeing out of Trump is that kind of hyperbolic rhetoric, that kind of tough guy, authoritarian, the conqueror, Trump the conqueror. I can just see it now because look, Trump has conquered America. There's no question. He's neutered our media. He has put the Republican Party in line, and he's got half the country to not care about any of the crimes or even an insurrection. And even most Democrats aren't all that worked up about it anymore. You know, we're mad, but, you know, are you? So the question becomes, Trump needs an enemy, right? Trump needs a target. He's neutered every line of opposition. Is Greenland next? Is the Panama Canal next? Are we going to go in and invade Greenland and Panama? I mean, the similarities between 1980 and now just again are, and I guess maybe I'm just seeing a lot of it because of Carter's passing. But it's got me wondering. And you go, what is Trump's goal? What is the end goal here? What's he looking for? If we're going to go start beating up on third world countries and on small countries, and if we're going to start being the bully, what for? Now, understand, there is a thinking on the right that we should go, seize these small countries, take them over, steal their natural resources, plunder. And that we should be the benefactors of that. And that's great if you believe that that's what we should be doing. But what about the rest of the world? Again, we're unfortunately not the only superpower. We have built up China through giving them our manufacturing for decades now. A bad policy, a bipartisan bad policy. You can blame Bill Clinton for signing off on it, but it was Republicans who were the majority on the side of it. This was that bipartisanship between Clinton and Gingrich. Now, granted, Clinton is going to be the one who, he saddled with it because he signed it. But we're here because of bad bipartisanship. So for me, the question is come January 20th, what are we getting? Are we getting what we were sold? Because the conversations I've had with people, it's about, I want my life to get better. I want what I had, when Trump was president. My 401k high. Oh, wait a minute. It is now. No, I want egg prices lower. It is now. I want gas prices lower. Yeah, it's a little bit lower. No, I want lower. I want more. And this revisionist idea of how things were during the Trump years. That phrase of, were you better off 4 years ago? And the answer is no. You weren't better off 4 years ago. You're better off now. Without question, hands down. And anybody who tells you, no, things were better 4 years ago is an idiot. But it's what we bought, isn't it? And understand, they are going to pursue every avenue to convince us the economy, when Trump becomes president, is going to be the best economy ever. And look, the right-wing message machine is already saying, we're going to take over other countries. I saw a clip of that idiot on Fox News, that Jesse Water. He was he was talking to the Ottawa Premier Doug Ford, and he said, quote, "I would consider it a privilege to be taken over by the United States of America." A privilege. This is, I guess this is that mentality that you get from some. Yes, you should be happy I beat you up. You should thank me for stealing from you. Because there's some people who think this way. Now, are we going to take over Greenland? I don't think so. Are we going after Panama? No. It's all rhetoric. It's all divisive rhetoric to, stoke the base, puff up the chest. Hey, yeah, our tough guy, he'll show you. We live in interesting times. And the hope is that we, the decent people of this country, that Americans reject it. But I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your thoughts on Jimmy Carter. I know my statements are not going to be popular. I'm expecting some angry stuff. So by all means, do send. And send some thoughts on what you think of now a conquering country. Trump the Conqueror. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, grab the podcast. As always, thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.